I'm Gemma and I'm interviewing Rhianne in her space. And the first thing I would like Rhianne to talk about is where does it all begin for you? When you're given the space or time to make a new project, how do you start?
I start with the space in mind, with the idea of the physical movement and that being the focus. But I definitely start with sort of research in the traditional sense of books, of reading. Reading's always been something where I feel that somehow begins everything for me. It doesn't mean that it's more important sort of textually than being in the studio, but it definitely begins with reading and almost finding little links to things I'm feeling, to things I'm thinking, and trying to pin down what I'm thinking, essentially just trying to validate to myself and make sure I completely understand what I want to do, and not where I want to go, but just so I know where I am in that particular moment. And it's definitely reading first, and then moving into my practice in terms of the physical side of it, then starting to play with movement, and then starting to think about how I embody those things in my head, those conceptual things that begin in books, which begin in books in the tangible sense, but they do begin the step before in me somewhere.
And do you find there's any sort of continuity in the sort of materials that you pick up? Obviously, if you might read something particular for a particular piece, but do you find that there are certain writers that you always lean towards? Or?
Definitely. I tend to go back to, even with different projects, go back to the same books. Like Kristeva is a big sort of thing for me. I always go back to Kristeva, and I always go back to Arto, and they're definitely people that I read, and I think I read them more because they're beneficial to me in everything I do, in my whole practice. They're not just specific to one project, and it's almost to kind of get myself in that place where I sort of to begin, to go back to the start. It's almost like that's, I always kind of go back and read those books, and sort of Powers of Horror is always something that I go back to time and time again, and occasionally I'll sort of like go to Levinas or something else, but it's usually specific people that there's something in those ideas that still attract me. There's still some space in there for me to kind of play with, and definitely going back to them over and over again somehow allows me to restart something which is old but also new.
Do you find you read much that's directly about dance? Because you mentioned Arte, you mentioned Kristeva.
I have to say no, and I guess it feels problematic to me, but it doesn't necessarily seem to be a problem. Somehow, starting with those then allows me to go into the studio, go into the space, and explore the dance. I don't really necessarily want to read about dance books. It's something that I want to find that bit myself. I want to have the things that inform me.
So then, how do you take that into the studio? How does that permeate the work, and how much of that might you share with the people that you work with?
I think in the early stages, I'm quite open about it, and I will talk a lot about books I've read and ideas I'm dealing with. And that's sort of when I first go into the studio, whoever's there with me, it's sort of the starting thing of going, well, this is what I've been doing, this is where I am right now. And the first part of transitioning into the studio is just talking in the studio. As time goes by, it becomes less and less. I share a lot at the beginning, and then I share the things that still become important. So down the line, 6 weeks, 7 weeks in, it could be I say one thing about objection, and objection is still a thing that's interesting me, but it's almost like it overlaps in a way which is that this begins, and then somewhere down the line the movement takes over so much that it's embodied, that it's now become something else, where it's still there but it's not verbalised as much. And I definitely take it in as a beginning point, but I don't consciously want to keep it there as the repeated sort of ideas of, oh, this text is important and this idea is important. It's more, well, that started us, let's see where we've gone from there.
So, we've chosen to do this in your space, and you and I have discussed why we might have chosen to do that. But can you just say a little bit for the camera about the way you organise and display objects in your space, and how much of that is about what you do and what you like to sort of show of yourself?
I'd say it's definitely, everything's very consciously placed. It's there for a reason. It's placed there for a reason. It's definitely my perfectionist side. I definitely think that I like to have my space tidy, and that it's something to do with, sort of subconsciously to do with me, and I guess surrounding myself with things that are not necessarily dance related, but things that are important to me and things that I enjoy, and sort of how, I think it's how they're presented is, it sort of interrelates with how I approach my work, like the order of it, the discipline. That I think that whole approach is sort of what appears in sort of how I approach my work. But it's definitely not necessarily dance, although there are things in here which are dance. But it's other parts of sort of what I class as my practice. So sketching and sort of the 40s, 50s, 60s ladies that I like, and it's art. It's things that inspires me and that I enjoy, but isn't necessarily something that I try to approach or drive through my dance practice. It is very specific though, and it doesn't really change. It's always been something that I've carried with me. So the space stays the same, but the location changes. Mm-hmm. Like this kind of setup is something that it's the consistent thing through, I guess, my life. No matter where I am, my space stays the same, and there's some sort of comfort in that, and there's some sort of.
Just picking up on that, do you think? Well, I'd be surprised if the answer was no. But is there a thing in your work that you're starting to realise, especially after doing this MFA? Is there something that's emerging now that you're realising is a consistency or something that continues to be of interest to you in the work that you make?
Yes, definitely. I think there's something about, order, and something about not safety, but something that relates to tidiness and discipline, which then allows for decay and chaos and madness. So I set up this very specific sort of guideline for myself, and then I kind of want to go and see how far I can break away from it and how much can be destroyed. And somehow I do think, as I said before, that it's a little bit masochistic on my part, because I know that paranoia's me so much to know that the order's broken, but I kind of want to play with that, and that kind of interests me. And I kind of want to go to that place where I'm going, I'm doing this consciously, and it's absolutely terrifying me, and I can't switch it off. And I do think that's definitely, and I think that's why I'm interested in pain practices and practices of risk, because it's something which pushes something which is inherent in me, deliberately going, let's see what happens if I do something which I know somehow is going to stop breaking me.